Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Well, let's see what we got here. I'm going to start here in just a moment. We've almost got our typical quorum going on here. It's good to see everybody. I hope everybody's having a good week so far. Okay, let's do this thing. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And we'll get started. So we are in good shape today. So we are in week 11. And I just want to point out that there's not much further to go. So we're going to talk today about hopefully where you're at with your papers and your Act 2 progress that you hopefully are making, or at least undertaking at this point. Next week, and incidentally, the last two workshops have gone really well, and I thank you guys for that, those of you who participated. And I just want to keep going with that as the Thursday routine. So for this Thursday, I'm proposing that we talk about your discussion post, which will be due on Sunday with feedback from your peers. What are you doing with your rising action? What are you doing in your Act 2? And I ask you a couple of questions in terms of how to describe that. Alternatively, for the workshop, we could also talk about specifics, any of the things that are classically associated with Act 2 story stages, like meeting your mentor, the metaphorical cave, tests of your allies or enemies. And so for the workshop, I'd like to offer that up in any of those forms as the discussion. So if you have something that you want to bring to the table and we can talk about together, that would be wonderful. And I welcome anybody who wants to, encourage anyone who hasn't yet shared in the workshop to please feel free to do so, and hopefully embrace the notion of getting a little bit of group critique. This is something that I have found monumentally helpful in my journey as a writer, in my development as a writer, particularly in my advanced education. And I also do sort of a form of this sort of writing workshop stuff personally as well, with writing that I'm working on outside of school. I have a number of people that I call and solicit their feedback and their opinions, their input on things that I'm working on. It's a helpful and healthy part of the process of evaluating your work and self-edit. Next week, we're going to talk about your halfway point, and we're going to talk about how you're going to start working towards your resolution. And then week 13 will be, how are you wrapping this thing up? What's your final conflict? What was the result of your quest? What was the denouement, your final push? How do you define your climax? And then we're into spring break. So we're kind of in the maybe 11, no, not really the 11th inning, maybe the 12th, 10th inning. So that's what's up. Let's look at your assignment. So I'm asking you to do a discussion post this week to describe what's going on with your Act 2. So I want you to think about it. I mean, it's probably, hopefully you're already, well into it at this point, but if you're not, if you're still sort of working it out, just give us a 2 to 3 paragraph discussion on what you're working on. Tell us give us a quick synopsis of your plot, talk about the action in Act 2 that you're working on. What kinds of challenges or conflicts are you presenting to your hero? And do any of these trials have or share cause and effect with the motives of your character, or any of the internal motivations of your character, any of the internal goals of your character? And do the physical, mental, or psychological inner conflicts of the hero determine the obstacles, or is it the other way around? And why, and how it works? And then I'd like you to ask at least one of your colleagues a question or two. Consider this list here. Does your character appear matched or outmatched for the tasks? Do the challenges have any apparent correlation to the character's traits or wounds? And do the challenges of the character's persona work with or against the plot of the story? And I think that these questions will become obvious to you after I give you my quick presentation for today. So this shouldn't be take too terribly long. Let me go now to my presentation here. So I've put together sort of, it's not really an eclectic set of concepts, but rather from some of your reading resources. I have come up with a few things that I just want to go over again really briefly to make sure that these are the types of things we're addressing. And I seem to be having technical difficulties here with my key. There it goes. Okay. With my keynote. Okay, so here we go. So today I want to talk to you about Act 2. Rising action, complications on the road, setbacks, this sort of thing. So in Act 2, you've revealed your world. You've introduced your heroes. You've called them to action, and you've given them motivation to set forth. You've given them an inciting incident of some kind. So now what? So this is what in some of your videos for this week, the question is posed to you, or the concept is posed to you, that Act 2 is when the story actually starts. So in Act 1, we're introducing a world, we're meeting characters, we're talking about who they are and what they're motivated by. Then something happens that's going to set things in motion. The motion is Act 2. So in the hero's journey, the heroic way offers depth of insight or meaning, guides your characters along the way. It's invigorating. The hero's motivation is often deepened. There are ongoing perils, probably, maybe, sometimes. Losing one's way is possible. Refusing the first call is a typical opener to Act 2. Misdirection and deception is also characterized in Act 2, and entanglements and confrontations. Through these struggles, the hero is infused with a greater vision and strengthened by the spiritual journey. More than anything else, it inspires one to take courage to live a life of authenticity. And so I want to put an image in your mind here for the next 45 minutes, half an hour. And that is, think of the original Star Wars movie and think of the notion that that concept was an overarching story, but it had one central character that sort of was the glue that held it all together, right? It was the character of Luke Skywalker. Who is Luke? Where is he from? What does he want? Where does he want to go? What's his call to action? Who does he meet along the way? What are his confrontations? And ultimately, does he accomplish his goal? It's all around the central character of Luke Skywalker. Okay. And one of the things that is being presented, particularly in the reading from Lagos Egri, the Art of Dramatic Writing, he's talking about the Act 2 portion, that segment of the hero's journey where all of these transgressions and these conflicts and these obstacles present themselves, that they are character building exercises for our hero. and that it's going to help with the hero's transformation from something unaware, unwise, undeveloped, unreasoned, or not fully grown or fully realized into this other entity by the end of this story. I caught a couple of really funny Calvin and Hobbes, which sort of encapsulate the notion, which is this little guy here and his father, and he goes through this series of interesting sort of not adolescent, pre-adolescent growing pains. He's complaining about why the family never bought a snowblower, and it was funny because when I read this, I was like, yeah, I know exactly how he feels. My parents never bought a snowblower either, and I was always the kid that was shoveling the snow by hand. And the father says, it builds character, keep at it. And when he's asked to eat his vegetables, he says, but what if I don't love it? And the father says, but it will build character. And finally, he arrives at the knowledge or the elixir that every time he's forced to grow, his father saves a couple of $100. And the father says, but think of the fine young man you're growing up to be. And he says, yeah, if all of this character building doesn't kill me first. So I thought that was an interesting sort of way of thinking about Act 2, which is the hero. You have to make some choices about Act 2. There's all these things that you're going to set against your hero, obstacles that may prevent the protagonist from achieving their goal or leading to some final conflict or climax. And is it going to pit the protagonist against the antagonist, and in what way? And it reminded me of the storylines, the 5 storylines that are in the story structure architect. And it's talking about, a basic question, not only the initial question, which is what is your story, but then what will be the fate of your hero? Will the hero succeed or will the hero fail? Because both things are possible and both things can happen in a successful narrative. Both things can happen in stories that we cherish for a lot of reasons. The hero doesn't always have to win. The hero can sometimes lose as well. And the basic through lines are going to teach your character some basic things. They're going to learn skills that they need to be successful. Even if the hero doesn't want to, it's sometimes the spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? It's like the hero's going to learn things whether they like it or not. It will make them successful in the end, hopefully. But they have to go through it one way or the other to strive for their goal. They're going to meet supporting characters along the way that are going to help them. So in your own stories, is your hero going to win or lose in the end? How are you going to define that win or loss? And then as they go through these challenges, through these stages in your story, are you also supplying your characters with supporting cast that can help your hero through their journey the way that we're talking about here in some of these story structure suggestions? Are you meeting supporting characters that'll help your hero succeed? Are they forced into hiding from the antagonist, for instance, or the forces of the antagonist? And the antagonist could be a person, it could be an idea, it could be a force of nature. And will they ultimately gain or find the knowledge that they need to reach their goal? Perhaps in the second act, they're stuck somewhere like a library or a cave with artifacts or information, or they meet an individual like the witch in the woods, for instance, or Merlin, that's going to, they're going to pause along the way in their journey to deal with this or confront this situation, and in the process come out the wiser for it. So your through lines are your main character is going to succeed, or they're going to be defeated. Are they going to abandon their goal altogether, just plain give up? Is that goal clearly defined for your hero, or does the hero have to discover that as well? Or is your story interactive in a way that somehow your audience is going to determine the outcomes? And I guess that would be pertinent to those of you who are maybe writing for possible video game experience. So an interesting thing emerged in my own preparation for today's discussion, And that was the conflicting views that Aristotle's Poetics poses against someone like Lagos Egri when talking about the second act, what happens in the act, and do characters drive plot, or does plot make characters possible? Which way do you agree with? Apparently there are advocates in both camps. Some folks are trying to merge the two concepts and do it all at the same time, which appears to be problematic. And I'm curious to know what field you favor in this on this particular question. Aristotle has a premise that character comes as a subsidiary to action. Hence, the incidents and the plot are the end of a tragedy. They're the culmination. Without action, there cannot be drama, but there may be without character. The modern drama interests us not predominantly by its depiction of human nature, but primarily by the situations, and only secondarily by the feelings or the motivations of our characters or our hero. So my question to you is, do you agree with that or not? You don't have to answer it here, but might be a good thing to think about and propose something on Thursday for the workshop. I think that there are folks that are advocating for this point of view, particularly in modern filmmaking. And I'm wondering, I'm just hypothesizing at this point, if this is contributing to a possible stagnation as a result. I personally advocate for the Lagos Egri point of view, which is that character drives plot. But before I talk to you about Lagos's key premise, I wanted to point out to you that the story structure architect, particularly if you subscribe to this notion of action driving plot, not characterization, then you might want to consider looking at the second portion of the story structure architect, and I have it in your reading assignment for this week, starting with the roller coaster ride. So there's several story plots or story structure, plot structure theses in this chapter. I'm asking you to take a look at, I think it's the 5 standouts, the notable ones. So we've got the roller coaster ride, we've got the romance, the journey. There's what else did I give you to look at? I have you skip the fates. Let me go back to the contents for a minute. Yeah, we skip the replay and the fate. I have you look at the parallel story structure and the episodic story structure, and then the melodrama. And these are each only a few pages each, so it's not a lot of intensive reading. It is steeped in diagrams and stuff as well. So it's not a really complicated read, I don't think. Now my navigation's not working. Why, oh, why? There we go. Okay. So the roller coaster ride in particular, I think, denotes Aristotle's point of view, which is that the action is going to take the precedence front and center, and that the characters are simply going to be reacting to the action and doing their best to survive the conflicts or resolve the problems or questions in a kind of recurring theme that gives us this sense of, we're winning, oh no, we're back in the hole, we're winning, oh no, we're back in the hole, and over as many times as you see fit, before you feel like your character's in a position to where they can start achieving their goal, reaching their denouement, and approaching the climax of the story. So I think personally that in this particular diagram, I think Act 1 really is only this first slope. I think Act 2 is really these 2 troughs and these 2 crests right here. We're going to start with an inciting incident here at the end of Act 1, and it's going to set us in motion, kind of like a roller coaster. And whoosh, we go through all of this. You know, our momentum carries us through Act 2. And then Act 3, I think, is probably at the bottom of this trough, where we start resolving the story, putting together the experience that we've gathered, the knowledge that we've learned, and applying that towards the resolution of our goal. So I think these two acts really need to kind of slide to the right a little bit. I don't know if anybody has an opinion on that or not, but if you go ahead and include this in your reading for this week, let me know what you think on that particular matter. Things that the roller coaster ride is going to give us as sort of marquee aspects of the rising tension that we're talking about. And again, this is listening it as Act 1, but I really think this is Act 2. The ticking clock concept. And this is a concept that we saw most notably in the cafe bomb scene from Mission Impossible, where literally one of the characters had a ticking clock attached to his chest, right? If that's not a direct reference to this kind of story structure, I don't know what is. And so Ethan has to go through this series of mental dueling with his antagonist, and will he accept the deal? Won't he accept the deal? Will he stop the countdown clock on the bomb or not? If not, how's the shootout going to go? Everybody's going to end up losing in the end because they're either going to get shot or blown up. How's this going to go? And is he going to figure a way out, right? The ticking clock. This is also something that I think James Cameron does really well. And I've had this conversation a number of times with a writing friend of mine out in LA, who's a big advocate of those movies, particularly the Terminator movies, where the ticking clock concept is going in every act of each of those films, particularly beginning in the second installment, Terminator 2, where there seems to be a ticking clock happening fairly routinely throughout the whole story. We're also presented with a major problem that we have to solve. We are meeting new characters. The problem is hopefully big enough to balance with the premise and provide us with a little bit of possible back and forth in terms of our character on his journey to entertain and capture the audience's attention. We might have a mini climax in Act 2. In other words, we might reach some kind of realization, capture some kind of magic artifact, or have a small victory that poises us to steal our commitment to the goal. In other words, reaffirm our commitment to the goal and launch us headlong into Act 3, which will be our climax. And all throughout Act 2, we're going to have time to build the mood and tone, but it's going to be in direct conflict with the action, which is going to be happening boom, 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 boom. So Lynn Schmidt here is sort of suggesting that I think she might, at least in the roller coaster concept, she might actually subscribe to Aristotle's point of view that in a roller coaster style plot structure, the action is driving your story and not necessarily your characters, which could be a problem, or it might not. I think it depends on the types of challenges you place in front of your hero and the types of support that they are wrapped around. For instance, like these Avenger movies, right? We don't really get to know very much about Captain America in the Avenger movies, right? He's got kind of his own movie to introduce us to Captain America. And then, but when he does these other movies, it's really about how Cap and his friends confront these issues and go through this roller coaster ride of action that sort of drives us through the whole movie. And at the end, they blow something up, or somebody gets, teleported to another planet, or whatever is going on. But we really don't get to know, well, how do you guys feel about it? Or what's your, do you agree with this person's point of view, or whatever it is? We don't really get to know those characters that well. And that would be a marquee aspect of this roller coaster application of story structure. So I encourage you to check out those other story structures in the reading assignment and see if they resonate with you at all. Like I said, each of these sections is only a couple of pages with diagrams and stuff, so it's not really intense reading. Okay. So having said that, let's take a look at what Lagos Egri says in The Art of Dramatic Writing. So, on characters' ability to drive plot. He's suggesting that a weak character cannot carry the burden of a protracted conflict in a film. He cannot support a story. When we're forced then to discard such a character as a protagonist, and that there's no sport if there's no competition, there's no film if there's no conflict. Without the center point, there is no harmony. And that's a fairly common, I think that's a fairly common belief amongst a lot of writers, whether that's for theater or film or a number of other venues, and that is that drama is conflict. Without conflict, you really don't have much to hold your story together. And the conflict, then you have to think about what sort of conflict are you supporting in your story, and then go back to the classic conflicts, you know, man versus himself, man versus man, man versus nature. Okay. And then you can expand on those ideas. And we've done so a little bit in the reading. Man versus society, for instance, man versus ideology. And then ideology has to have an anthropomorphic antagonist to represent that side of the argument. The dramatist needs not only characters who are willing to put up a fight for their convictions, but he needs characters who have the strength and the stamina to carry this fight to its logical conclusion. And that's going to be the thing that's going to sustain us through Act 2. It's going to keep our audience entertained, and it's going to provide the body of our story. Remember, it was, what's her name? Chamberlain, who wrote the nutshell concept. She was saying that the hardest part of writing is Act 2. Michael Hogue subscribes to the same notion that the hardest part of writing is Act 2, which is where is the story that we wrap around our justifications, our motives, and our interesting characters that we've created. So both of those script doctors, as it turns out, they both subscribe to the notion that it's easy to write Act 1 where we create a world and introduce characters. And it's easy to describe a goal that they can achieve, but between the creation of the world and the hero and the goal, that's when the story has to happen. And that's where everything sort of breaks down unless we have a good solid structure to rely on. We might start with a weak man who gathers strength as he goes along, or we may start with a strong man who weakens through conflict. Either way, as he weakens, he must have the stamina to bear his humiliation. Okay. Who then are the weak characters as opposed to the strong ones? And they are the ones who have no power to, are they the ones who have no power to put up a fight? Okay, so he's suggesting that, you know, weak protagonists are an inhibitor to a good story. And interestingly enough, I came across this very thing in a mini series that I was looking at over the past, the last week or so, called 000. And it's a canal, it's a mixed production. It's Mexican-Italian co-production, produced and exhibited by Prime Video on Amazon. It's an 8-part miniseries called 000. Okay. And it's about the cocaine trade, the global cocaine trade. And in this miniseries, we have a cast of characters that are represented by both strong and weakly motivated inner and outer goal characters, which is very interesting. We have they call him the grandfather. Okay, he's the head of an Italian drug cartel called the Ndrangheta. Okay, and he's like the patriarchal head of the family, kind of like Don Corleone was the head of the family in The Godfather. And he has as his what we think is his supporting cast, his grandson, who ends up being his antithesis. We also have they're called the Leyra family, which is a drug family in Mexico who produces the product and has the military led by this guy, Contreras, and they create and funnel the material to this family over here, the Linwood family, who has a patriarch in the form of Gabriel Byrne, but he's killed off basically in the first few minutes of the film. So he's kind of the inciting incident for this part of the story, and in that he's assassinated. And he was the patriarch. He was the person who created a global shipping corporation that when he was killed passed on to his children. He has two children. He has a son and he has a daughter. And the interesting thing about this combination is, like over here, we have the grandfather running the business. Turns out the grandson wants to run the business, and so he decides he's going to kill the grandfather. Over here, the patriarch dies from being assassinated. Contreras kills this grandfather, right? And the business passes to the kids. The male who would normally be who would normally take over the family business in a very male-dominated industry, turns out he has a fatal wound. He has a disease. He's going to die. And it debilitates him in ways that he needs medications, and sometimes he has spells where he's affected by either too many drugs or by an imbalance in his physiology because of his disease. He's in many ways incapacitated. Very smart, but he's been babied his whole life because his family has been cursed with the knowledge that he's going to die one of these days. His mother had the same disease. It struck very quickly. And it will kill him before he reaches mature adulthood. The daughter, on the other hand, who represents the secondary hierarchy within the family, because it's a male-dominated industry. Okay, all of the machismo of the the drug business and everything, and very male-driven, testosterone-driven, and yet she has the brains, the logistical capabilities. She has all of the character traits that the father would have loved the son to have had, but the son instead was stricken with the disease. So she's in a secondary role to him, but they have to work together. Over here, we got Contreras. He was in the Mexican military, who was part of a drug sting operation called the Narcos. He is subservient to a very dominant captain in the military, head of this sort of narcotics operation, who was very gung-ho, war on drugs kind of guy. And Contreras, who didn't like playing second fiddle, and didn't necessarily care about the drug industry as a moral issue, right? Take it or leave it. He decides that he's going to take control of the military, and he ends up staging a takeover of his battalion, or whatever you want to call it, and gets in bed directly with the Leyra family and helps them assertively create their product and get it shipped out of the country. And so we've got all of these interesting conflicts happening. Each one represents a transfer of power, and each one represents a character that's in a position of superiority and a position of inferiority. And at the end of the movie, most of it is going to switch. Not all of it's going to switch. The one thing that we would think would be a shoe-in, the grandson killing the grandfather, ends up not happening. The grandfather figures it out and cuts him off at the pass, so to speak, before he can succeed in his goal. And in the process, we learn that through subtext, his father, the patriarch's own son, tried the same thing a generation prior, and the grandfather had to put down that insurrection as well. So it seems like it's a familial generational thing where the grandfather now for 2 generations straight has had to put down the violent overturn of the business and the family product by his own offspring. He ends up winning in the end in this particular battle. In this particular battle, the older son, knowing that he has a wound that is incurable, sacrifices himself in the climactic moment where will they succeed in delivering the drug shipment to the Italians or not, leads the antagonists away from the real shipment while it's happening, leads them to a dead end where they kill him as a result, but he knows he's dying anyway, and therefore turns over the whole empire to the sister who the father wished it could go to in the beginning secretly anyway. And at the end of the film, we see the results, the aftermath. The grandfather, who now has this incredible wound that for 2 generations he's had to kill his own family to maintain his own power base. We have the daughter of the shipping magnate who has risen to the position, the apex position in their broker family, by losing the father to assassination and losing the brother to assassination, but she would have lost him anyway to disease. So the emergence of these 2 unlikely characters at the end of this miniseries, I thought was pretty interesting, because it was probably the outcome with the least probability. And yet it led me through 8 successful 1-hour installments and culminated in a pretty, I think, a satisfactory ending. So these, I thought this was a really interesting example that adhered to a lot of the things that we've talked about as far as characters' inner wounds, their motivations, the hero's journey, right? It's all in there because each of these characters, particularly the brother and sister, go through some pretty harrowing adventures on the road, getting their shipment delivered from Monterrey, Mexico to the Italian coast in the Mediterranean. So they go through a lot of actual exhibitional journeys, conflicts along the way. And then this is mostly internal. It's plotting and it's plans being dashed and hopes being dashed on the part of the grandson. And then over here, it's a lot of physical action. So the only thing we really learn about Contreras along the way is that he's an odd dichotomy of ambition and spirituality. So he is a very devout Catholic. He goes to church like several times a week. He's really preoccupied with the notions of sin and righteousness and mandates by God, and yet he kills his boss to get his boss's power and authority, and he works as the private essentially security and escort service for the biggest drug cartel in Monterrey, Mexico. So he's a really odd dichotomy within himself, right? He's the 2 opposing forces in the same body. And then again, at the end, the 2 weakest characters triumph over all of this powerful ambition going on in the rest of the series. If you get an opportunity, if you have Amazon Prime or whatever, and you can give it a look, I think it's worth the time if you look at it from a writer's point of view and sort of analyze what's going on. I don't know if it will be subject matter wise your cup of tea or not. Maybe not. It's got a healthy mix of a lot of things that will keep you entertained. But like I said, I think it adheres to a lot of stuff that we've been studying here in class. So then Lagos Egri, what does he have to say? He's asking some questions. Which is more important, plot then or character? I think in a situation like 000, the plot of drugs are made in Mexico, put on a boat, shipped to Italy and sold on the black market is something you can do in one movie, 1-hour TV movie, 2-hour theatrical movie, right? If that weren't the case, we wouldn't have movies like The Counselor, let's say. Very complex story, right? But they did it in 2 hours. You don't need more time than that to do The Counselor. This took 8 hours. This took a full miniseries to do it. Why? Because we have all of these characters that we have to learn about and understand. And by understanding their ambitions or their wounds, we understand their motivations. When we understand their motivations, we then see those motivations put into action, and the actions lead from one to the other and carry us through the story. So I think in many ways, Lagos is really onto something here in that that plots can be, they can be as simply stated as Aristotle asserts in his book, Poetics, or it can be as complex as you want it to be. And the more complex it is, I think, I think the more compelling it may be for your audience, because now, instead of going for the low-hanging fruit, drugs are made, put on a boat, shipped to Italy, we have all these layers of the onion that we can unpack if we want to dive that deeply into it. So you might have a broader audience, I think. Some of the audience might not mind the mental calisthenics and looking deeply at these characters and getting to understand what kind of mind can accept the notion of killing their own grandson to maintain their own power base. Or, what are the motivations of somebody who is ultimately given the choice to sacrifice themselves for the goals of another, right? Or how can somebody as devout and Christian as someone who goes to church 4 times a week, how could they kill their own their own superior officer and then take over in other words, the company business, right? So very interesting that we have these different offerings for these different layers of our own audience. So the inference, he says, is unmistakable. Character creates plot and not vice versa. A coward might create a farce. A brave man might create a tragedy. Conflicts grow out of character and not vice versa, he says. Every character, therefore, represents a world of their own. The more you know of this person, the more interested you may become as an audience member. So what is a character then? A character is a factor whose virtues have yet to be discovered, he says, and we discover them on the road. We learn about them. They come on our radar in Act 1. We learn about them in Act 2. In other words, you can know somebody, but you don't really know them until you've had a bender with them or gone on a vacation with them, or, any number of events that might broaden your notion of who this individual is based on what you thought you knew, right? We have learned that every human being consists of 3 dimensions: psychological, physiological, and sociological. And if we break it down, we can see that the physical, social, and mental makeup of a character provides the incentive for the builder or the mover in all of our actions to motivate us in everything that we do. Therefore, character is plot. They are interchangeable. And this is right out of The Art of Dramatic Writing. I've paraphrased everything for you. It covers 3 chapters of his analysis of character motivation, and so forth. But I think that's the kernel of wisdom that he's driving at in those chapters, which is he comes to the ultimate conclusion that character is plot. Therefore, your characters, if they are, and this is why I press the notion of character dossiers, if your characters are fully realized in your writer's mind, right, and you know how they're going to act, how they're going to speak, what they would do, what they wouldn't do, what they want, what they don't want, and then allow that thing that you've created to sort of tell you what it wants, that it can almost lead you. And the Coen brothers will solicit to this idea as well. They'll say good characters write their own stories, right? So that with really solid character base and character motivation, a really good understanding of who these folks are, is the plot's going to start writing itself. If you know what the ultimate goal is, the plot will write itself. I haven't tested that theory yet myself, but I kind of agree. I think that they're on the right track. So character and motive provide story. And that's the structure theory applied, right? So think about whatever structure you solicit to at this point in the semester. Understand that, particularly in the case of the 3-act structure from Vogel or from McKee or Hogue, that along with the 3 acts that dictate the action and the sort of diagram or the shape of your plot, we have these character related things that are going on as well in a number of different stages. And there are concepts associated with each of those stages. Okay, so it's limited awareness to increased awareness to ultimate awareness or to secret knowledge. We call that sometimes elixir. reluctance to accept responsibility heaped on the hero without a choice, commitment, non-commitment, experience, preparation and experience, right? Conflict, wins or losses. Sometimes losses are equally as effective to the hero as winning. Consequences of those conflicts. And then a question is going to come about, it's going to arise, which is, will you continue or will you give up? If you will give up, why? And in what fashion does that happen? And what does that mean for your ultimate goal? Does it result in failure? Or does it result in a sequel where Rocky has to go back and face Apollo Creed again, right? Because he loses in the first movie. So it's a rededication to your goal, right? A final press, an ultimate climax, and then some form of mastery or resolution. And this is all character, I think, all powerfully character-driven stuff. And therefore, the action can sort of take almost any form once you understand what your hero's arc is, right? So if we look at Rocky, for instance, how does he start the movie Rocky? He's a bone breaker, right? He's a finger breaker. He's the guy who goes around to all of the folks who aren't paying the protection money for the Don of Philadelphia, and he makes them pay up, or he breaks something, an arm, a leg, a finger, whatever, right? And he's a ruffian, not very well educated, doesn't seem to have any clear outward goals, just getting through one day to the next, relying on the hand that feeds him, almost like the giant dog that he has that, runs alongside him every morning, right? Doesn't put a lot of faith in a lot of internalizations like dreams and ambitions, because he's very pragmatic and he doesn't think that those things are practical for somebody in his position to distract him from what his day-to-day responsibilities are. And yet somebody convinces him that he could be a really good boxer if he would just apply himself. And that gets into his head and starts working on him. But it takes a while. And when it starts transforming him, he then has to go through a whole series of challenges, right? He's got to get in shape. He's got to find a trainer. Nobody wants to train him except Mickey, right? And then Mickey turns out to be the one who has put it in his head that he can be more than he thought of himself as being. He meets a love interest, right? All of a sudden, when he gets tempted by this goal, and then he accepts the challenge of, okay, so what if I do eat my broccoli and I do like it, the opposite of Calvin and Hobbes. What then, right? And so it's like, well, I don't know. We'll have to see how you handle it. So how do you handle the girl? How do you handle your training? Do you take it seriously? And then what if you fail, right? Mickey dies. He has to get over that, right? And he has to go and he has to fight this iconic archetype, Apollo Creed, right? And in that critical moment, that writer decides he's not big enough for that challenge. He's going to fail, right? But in that sort of decision, we also have a compelling movie, right? Because there's going to be a portion of the audience who understands the pain of having their dreams dashed, or striving for something and failing and coming up short. So we're going to have a compelling, entertaining story, whether this hero wins or loses. And sometimes the devastation of loss can be a very strong motivator. And then what do we get? We get Rocky 2, right? Okay, this time it's going to be different, right? In a world where Rocky lost the first fight, he comes back and faces Apollo Creed, and this time it's going to be different, right? That whole kind of thing. And then you end up with, two stories out of one, by having the very interesting and compelling notion that your hero doesn't get to win in the end. He gets the girl, but he doesn't get the trophy. So he kind of splits the decision in that respect. But we see a really interesting, moment, like at the end of the movie, I think they're both in the hospital, and Rocky can't sleep, and he goes to Apollo Creed's hospital room and he says, "Yo, did you give me your best fight?" And he says, "Yeah, I gave you my best fight." And he rolls over and he goes back to sleep. And so we see in Rocky that there's even more to this guy than we thought there was, because once he latches onto something, he doesn't let go until he solves that problem, whatever it is, which made him a really good finger breaker. Because if somebody owed the Don money and they weren't paying up, the Don wasn't the kind of guy that could go lay the heat on somebody and get them to pay up. He's a skinny, wispy, kind of oily guy that, he just didn't have the lumber. Rocky did. And if he knew that, that somebody owed this guy money, and Rocky depended on this guy for a paycheck, Rocky was going to go and make you pay up, and you were going to pay. So he has a problem and he won't let go until he solves it. And that tells you at the end of Rocky 1 that there's no way there can't be a sequel to this movie. This guy's not going to let this thing go. And therefore, the nature of his very character dictates there must be a sequel, right? You can't leave this story here. He can't just lose and go back to being what he was before. That cat is out of the box, and that ship has sailed, we say, right? There's no way, when somebody has reached the elixir, the secret knowledge or the mastery or the realization, and they grow into something bigger than they were when the whole thing started, you can't put that thing back in the box. It can't be done. So then what are you going to do about it? Well, the writer seeks a new adventure, right, for that hero. And then the hero dictates what that adventure will be. Rocky's got to face Carl Weathers again. And he'll do it again and again if he has to until he wins. Well, it turns out he beats him in the second movie, right? And then in the third movie, Carl Weathers comes back yet again, but not as the antagonist, as the mentor. So really interesting how the roles can be switched and moved around, and then follow that whole series if you want to, and see how well it adheres to your story structure or design, whichever one that you think works best for your writing style or the stories you're telling. But Rocky, I think, is another terrific example of that. It just really works on a lot of levels, right? And so ask yourself a very simple question. Knowing what you do about Hollywood and how things work and how compartmentalized it is and how power and structures are sort of delineated by union lines or guild lines, or this is my job, that's your job, and we all kind of do our own thing and stay in our own lane, right? What's the likelihood that Hollywood's going to allow an actor to also be the writer and the director of a movie? Well, they gave him 2 out of 3. He wanted to direct it. They almost let him. And then he ended up getting the writing credit and starring in the movie himself. And that's really not likely unless the story was so good that it compelled these people to make this movie, regardless of what their typical responses to a question of, split responsibility might be. Letting the actor provide the script is kind of, it used to be really unusual, not so much anymore. So I put a thought in your head in the beginning of this about Star Wars, the original Star Wars, and what it was, how it was sort of staged in its storytelling structure and complexity. And it was a centrally located character. All these other characters are supporting characters, right? But now look at what the Star Wars universe has become. Sort of Luke Skywalker has had something that we call, where they refer to as an apotheosis, right? An apotheosis is the hero's ascension, sometimes bodily, into heaven, right? Promoted from mere hero to godlike status, right? And if you look at this sort of concept poster of the new Star Wars universe, look at how Luke used to be in the center of the whole image. The whole image used to radiate out from Luke Skywalker. Look, the whole thing radiates out from the central character. And these are all supporting characters, right? The story was about the kid who grows up and conquers an empire. But now in the new universe, he has his apotheosis. He's now a concept. He's now an idea that is stronger than the individual. And these surrounding individuals have ascended from the role of supporting characters. Some of them are lead characters. Here's Star Wars 7, right? There she is. Here, I mean, the young princess, Amidala, is it? From Star Wars 1, way back there, right? Yoda has a prominent role here. Here's Kylo Ren, right? The Emperor, and Obi-Wan turned out to be a lot more than we thought he was. All of these characters have sort of kind of taken on lives of their own, roles of their own outside of the supporting role that they gave to Luke in the beginning, or they might be the progeny, like Kylo Ren is the progeny of. Anakin was the progeny of, right? We learn all of these things as a result of this story kind of getting bigger and bigger, but it started with one central character and his motivations, his internal conflicts, and his goal. And it turned into this whole big thing. So I wanted to sort of plant those ideas in your head as you're going through your second act storytelling now. Sort of as a check for you, if you haven't thought about this already, as a check to confirm, what path you're on with your own project, right? Have you thought about these things? Are they coming into play? And if so, how? And that's kind of what your discussion post is about this week. Okay. And again, if there's anything that you want to bring to the workshop, I welcome that broadly, because for the last 2 or 3 now, it's been going pretty well, I think. And hopefully it's been helpful for you folks, whoever has attended. So that's it. So check out the Story Structure Architect. That's Victoria Lynn Schmidt. It's on your bookshelf, PDF form. And the Roller Coaster, Parallel, Episodic, Melodrama, Romance, and Journey. They're all in chapter 2 in Building Structure. And then have a discussion post done with at least one response by Sunday night, and hopefully something to come to the table on Thursday. I want to ask you one last thing now before I let you guys go, and that is, at this point, is there anyone who is confused about what your final project is supposed to be? Because I've got a couple of folks that have still expressed in this late stage of the game that they are confused about what's expected of them in their final project. I want to make sure that this is not a widespread problem, that it is a contained and topical issue that I can solve with a couple of Zoom sessions, private Zooms. Is everybody fairly fixed on what they're doing and what the expectations are and what your product will be that you're going to turn in at the end of the semester?
I know that it's a script, and we're building. If we're doing the same project, we're building on top of our other one. I know I've asked you this before. I don't remember if you came to a decision. Would I be able to do my season finale instead of like building off of the first episode?
Is that a little bit like skipping Act 2?
Kinda, yeah.
Are you going right to Act 3? Well, consider this. I'm not opposed to that idea, but consider this, right? And Stephen King solicits to the same idea, which is, if, as LaHouche says, characters are story or characters are plot, and your characters haven't gone through the evolution of the series of episodes where they learn and they gain knowledge, or they gain weakness, or they gain strength, and whatever is going to happen to them, will those transformations play any part in your Act 3, in your finale? Because if they do, then I think you owe it to yourself not to write your finale next, but to just continue on with, episodes within the Act 2 sort of sense of the structure, to give those characters some opportunity to grow. Do you solicit to the idea that your characters will start to take a life of their own? Or are you kind of the omnipotent God figure in your universe, where everything and only everything happens according to your will and your design. It depends on what kind of writer you are.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, I have all of the like character arcs planned out, like written in my treatment and stuff like that. So I already know what the arc is going to be. I just think that like personally, I find it's helpful when I'm writing a script to figure out the beginning and then figure out the ending, and then I could like work in between, fill in those gaps. So that's what I wanted. That's what like I wanted to do. But if you think I should do it a different way, that's fine.
Well, here's what I'll say about that. Obviously, we got to know what the end goal is, right? And I
Mhm.
think that that's been stated a couple of times in the semester already. Whereas, how can you tell a story if you don't know how the story ends, right? So, in some sense,
Mhm.
it could be a good exercise for you if you're thinking about this project that you're working on as something that's going to take on a life outside of this class. In other words, it's a project you're going to continue to work on throughout your college experience here and in and outside of school. Then the exercise of creating a finale, excuse me, for your first season is good in the sense that if you're going to firm up the goals for your hero at this point, then that could be a good thing. And then embrace the notion that that could change at some point, right?
Mhm.
In other words, you've done your pilot, you've done your you've got a good jump on your Bible, and now you want to say, okay, this is what the character wanted, and this is how I'm going to define the end of the season for this character. And then you're going to go back into the middle and you're going to start to do things. Are you going to back engineer that end solution into your episodes to make them conform to the goal that was reached? Or are you going to allow things to happen sort of organically, spontaneously in your writing to where you might come to the point where you say, whoa, I just realized, wouldn't it be neat if the character took this path instead of this one the way I thought they would? And then how's that going to affect my finale?
Mhm.
You may have some re-engineering to do as a result. But I'm sort of on the fence about it. I think that, I'm going to trust in your judgment on this. If you feel like it's going to help you to write that finale first, then be my guest. Just understand that it may change.
Okay.
Anybody else? And incidentally, it doesn't have to change in the time that we're doing this class, but it may change outside of this class. It may change for you this summer. You got some spare time and you're working on it. It may change for you next year. We don't know. So for me, I'm fine with you writing the finale because it satisfies the course, but it may not satisfy your ultimate project. Anybody else have any thoughts on the question of the final project? No? Crickets? Okay. Alrighty. Well, then I won't keep you. This is a quickie today, I think, but that's okay. It's nice once in a while to have a short day. If you can, bring something to class to workshop on Thursday. I don't want to be the one that talks every class period. I want to hear your guys' ideas. I want to hear how your writing is evolving. I want to hear about what you're learning from the process of discovering what kind of writer you are. And I want to listen on Thursdays. So,
So
yes.
I do have a quick question. For Thursday, are you wanting us to workshop script pages, or are you wanting us to workshop like narrative prose, kind of like what we've been submitting as summaries of our script pages?
I think whatever you deem appropriate, and now the prompt, right? Because you have a discussion assignment that's
Right.
and you know what that's all about. And I've kind of planted some seeds in your head to re-examine characters and their motivation as a possible driver of plot. So you could talk about that and tell us what you're doing in your case. Or if you think that some script pages would better illustrate that point, I'm for that too. So whatever you want to share, I think this is an opportunity for you to share something of your own work. So whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm going to have it this Thursday or next Thursday, but I'll work on something.
Okay. hopefully you're working on your final project. So what I was kind of hoping is that folks might bring in pieces of what they're doing to sort of spitball, or to, you know, workshops really are good. They don't always have to happen after you've written the product, right? They can happen in the stages of development of the project, and you're sort of feeling your way through a process. I'm not sure which way I should have my character go. Should I let my character win or lose, right? Here's what I've got so far, and it feels like I'm going to let him win. But what does everybody think based on what I'm doing here? Do you have any thoughts on it? And it could help you actually get through these stages. So, you know, this will be, you know, I'm going to trust you to pick something appropriate and bring it in and share.
Okay, perfect.
Anybody else? No? Going once, going twice, going chicken soup with rice. Okay. Thanks for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Good luck with your writing projects, and I'll see you all on Thursday. Have a good afternoon.
Have a good day.
Goodbye, Professor.
Thank you.